Christian Entrepreneur Session 2 supplement video. It contains the things we couldn't fit into the Session 2 video. It's got important things in it like contract law, documents, terms and conditions, standard language, common practice, and boilerplate. Important things to know if you're thinking about going into business. Basically, you need to understand the language of business and the jargon thereof. So first we talk about the elements of a contract law. Every contract has 4 elements. It can have a lot more than 4, but every contract's going to have 4 elements, and you need to understand what they are. One is competent parties. You cannot have a contract that involves, for example, a minor. They're not able to enter into contracts because they're not competent to represent themselves in a contract negotiation. Also, things like mental impairment as a result of chemistry or diseases or that sort of thing would also make someone an incompetent party. So you have to have competent parties. You have to have an agreement. An agreement involves, here's what I'm going to do and here's what you're going to do. Basically, when you're in negotiation, you have offers and counter-offers going back and forth. When you finally agree, you have an agreement. So there will be a clause that lays out what the agreement is. There must be consideration being exchanged. In other words, the contract has to involve value that is changing hands. So the consideration is the value that each party brings to the contract. In a simple contract like the sale of a car, I agree to deliver the car, the keys, and the title when you deliver the money. Your consideration is the money, and my consideration is the car, the keys, and the title. And then the contract also has have a legal purpose. If I contract somebody to do something for me that is illegal, and I pay them some upfront money so that they'll get started on that, and then they just disappear, can I sue that person in a court of law? Well, of course not. That would be admitting that I was involved in an illegal contract. So every contract has to have a legal purpose. Now, within that contract, there'll be a lot of terms, and I wanted to make sure that you understood some of the common ones. Most of the terms that are in contracts are governed by the Uniform Commercial Code. It's a set of laws that were adopted by all U.S. states, the District of Columbia, and most U.S. territories and possessions, and they govern the conduct of business. So the first thing that we want to talk about is a document called a quotation. A quotation is a document created by the seller that names the parties to the transaction, the goods offered, the quantities, offered prices, transaction currency. In U.S. dollars is most common. Any freight charges, shipping and handling, other charges, terms of transfer, payment terms, timing of things, and any other relative information. It's your offer to sell. An estimate is very much like a quotation. However, it's usually used with service and repair activities where the exact cost is not known because of all the surrounding circumstances that are not fully known. So a remodeling, for example, would begin with an estimate and not with a quotation. Purchase order is a document created by the buyer with substitutes for the buyer signing the quotation or estimate, and it substitutes some of the buyer's terms for the seller's terms and specifies the exact billing and shipping address, shipping method, and so on. Generally, purchase orders will also have a page or more of boilerplate language stating how various aspects of seller non-performance or other disasters are handled. Boilerplate is usually standard terms that are printed in very small type, so they look like scratchings on the side of a steel plate, so that's why it's called that. An invoice is the seller's bill for payment of all agreed charges by the buyer. It will parrot back all of the significant terms on the purchase order, the estimate, or quotation, whichever rules. A warranty document is a document created by the seller or maker if the seller is not the maker, defining which aspects of performance of the goods or services are covered and what remedies to the buyer are in the event that the purchased goods or services fail in use in the covered period. Now, almost all warranties will contain a couple of things. Limitation on the warranty, and open-endedness. In other words, we can change this warranty anytime we want. Anything we sell after the date of the new warranty is under the new warranty. And the other is that no other warranties, express or implied, are allowed. So in other words, the warranty that is written down is the only warranty. It prevents you from having a salesperson inadvertently create a warranty for you by their verbal, whatever they say in order to try to get the order. Shipping terms. Deliver or free shipping means the seller delivers, either by their own means or by a common carrier, and title to the goods passes on release of the shipment at the stated destination by the common carrier or placement on the buyer's property by the seller. So when you order a package with free shipping, when do you own the package? When it hits your front porch. When you order a product that is delivered, when do you own it? When you get it. The other possible terms here might be free on board. A lot of terms come from sailing ship days. What free on board means is that title to the goods passes when the seller has placed the goods in the hands of a common carrier. In other words, it's on board their vehicle, in their warehouse, in their hands, then the buyer owns it. What this does is it prevents the seller from having to insure that package as it travels to the buyer. If the buyer wants extra insurance, then that's typically not quoted in the shipping and handling terms, and the buyer has to specify that they want to have shipment insurance included. Freight collect means that the buyer pays the common carrier, usually by being billed directly by the carrier, and it's common when the buyer has negotiated discounts with a carrier or carriers. So a lot of buyers will have discounts with carriers. They want to direct all their shipments to those carriers, and so they will say freight collect, and then they get the discount on the carrier rather than paying typically standard shipping rates. Prepay and add to invoice is another shipping term where you'll say FOB, for instance, if your business, let's say, is in Chicago, you'll say FOB Chicago, and then you'll say prepay and add to invoice, or prepay and add, or maybe just prepay. It means that the seller places the goods on the common carrier. When does title change hands? When it gets to the common carrier. And then the seller also pays the freight bill and puts the charges on the invoice to the buyer. Payment terms. The most common is net 30 or net 30 days. It means the buyer pays the seller's invoice 30 days from receipt of the goods or services. Typically the date of the invoice will be the date that the title changes hands, okay? So 30 days from basically shipment. Also other payments like net 45, net 90, and net 120, and large corporations like to use these terms as a way of keeping their cash in their hands longer. Basically borrowing the money from their suppliers that they need to operate. I always wonder why a Fortune 50 company needs to borrow my money to stay afloat, but if you want to do business with a big company, a lot of times you have to accept those longer terms. Buyers often pay late, even though they say they'll pay 90 days or 45 days or 60 days or 30 days. Buyers often pay late as a cash management strategy and refer to the practice as stretching terms. Again, if you're smaller than they are, there isn't an awful lot you can do about it. If you don't have the power in the market to do anything about it, then you just maybe have to just accept that. Discount terms. Okay, this is a little bit archaic. It's not commonly used today, but a lot of buyers still like it, and a lot of sellers still like it. I personally like it. And I will offer 3% 10 net 15, for example. And what that means is if you'll pay me within 10 days, you write that check 10 days after I send you the invoice, or the date on my invoice, I will let you take a 3% discount. Okay, so it's sort of like as though you were paying by credit card. I will have to pay 3 to 4% for handling the money on a credit card anyway, but I'll have the money in a couple of days. What I would rather do is give you the 3%, and then you just pay me quickly. Okay, so I'll go 3% 10 net 15, 3% 10 net 30, 3% 10 net 45, something like that. Other common discount terms are offered for payments in advance or for payment in various lengths of times. Progress payments are used when the price of the goods is relatively high and the goods are fully custom or customized to some extent. For example, with manufacturing equipment, ships, aircraft, buildings, etc., simple terms for machinery may be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. In other words, 1/3 when you place the order, 1/3 when we ship the machine, and 1/3 in 30 days. So it'd be expressed as 1/3 with purchase order, 1/3 time of shipment, and net 30. Other payment schedules are based on milestones as defined in quotation, estimate, purchase order, whichever rules the transaction. Procurement of certain specified goods by government contract is often paid in progress payments. For example, if the Navy's buying a big ship and it takes 4 years to build it, you as a supplier are not going to allow them to have net 30 terms. You're going to want to get progress payments so that you can stay afloat. See, there's a pun. So you can stay afloat during construction of that ship. So you'll be asking them to pay when you meet certain milestones in the construction process, and that's progress payments. You also sometimes see time bomb clauses included in many purchase orders for things that are custom or one of a kind. What that does is it forces the seller to meet certain time frames or certain construction milestones or certain performance specifications or whatever, or there are specified amounts of penalty for that. That's common again in construction contracts, building ships, building custom tooling and stuff. Okay, so those are common business terms in the United States. There's a lot more, but those are common ones you'll run into. There are also some common business terms that are used in import and export, and those business terms are ruled by typically the Incoterms. Now, Incoterms are a modified set of terms that came from common practice terms in international trade. There is no overall government of the world, and so international trade occurs based on an agreed upon set of standards. And if you mention Incoterms, then the definitions of those terms are understood in all countries that accept Incoterms. So, for example, one of the terms is called a pro forma invoice. It's a form of invoice in advance. It's issued by the seller to make assurance that the seller will perform according to the purchase order if the pro forma invoice is paid. International payments are almost always irrevocable by the buyer, as the seller has no legal recourse to collect payments across international boundaries. In other words, the buyer must pay up front. The prospect of future business and integrity reputation is usually enough to cause the seller to perform. So why is the buyer not willing to accept payments on terms? Well, you have no way to sue a company that's not in a country that you do business in. So you really have no recourse, and generally home courts are favorable to home businesses. So almost all international sales is done on a cash upfront basis. A lot of those are done with credit cards. We see things like Venmo being used now, PayPal. But the more traditional way of doing it is with a letter of credit. It's a means for moving sums of money in which the buyer has some conditions placed on release of the funds to the seller. So during the transaction, funds are held by an intermediary bank, which is neither the bank of the buyer or the seller, with performance requirements of the seller, such that arrival at the destination import control facility triggers release of funds to the seller. Or sometimes the seller might accept a situation in which they have to show, for example, a piece of equipment can make product that's acceptable at a certain rate of speed or something like that, although that's less common. Generally, a letter of credit will release when the goods are arrived at the destination import control facility. Once funds are placed in an intermediary bank, the transaction is irrevocable by the buyer unless the seller fails to perform as required to trigger release of funds within a specified period of time. Okay, so it's held by a third party. Wire transfer is electronic transfer of money. It's kind of an archaic system, but it's still used. It's electronic transfer of money from a bank account in one country to a bank account in another country by use of the SWIFT system, which is basically a network of teletypes across the world, which tells you how far back that goes, probably to the 50s. The seller has to reveal bank account number and router to the buyer, so you want to be aware of the scam artists. So lots of sellers have a bank account that's set up with 25 cents in it, and so no scam artist getting the account number gets more than the 25 cents that's in the account. Electronic check means funds are transferred within the USA by the ACH system as a virtual check, and outside the USA by whatever compatible foreign country system is. For example, England has a compatible system, Canada has a compatible system, so on and so forth. The seller has to give the buyer their bank account number and their routing code within their country. So once again, a lot of sellers have bank accounts with only 20 cents in or something. And like I said, PayPal, Venmo, several other systems are becoming common for seller transactions overseas. I've even received funds from overseas buyers by Western Union. Just depends on the country and what their infrastructure is. Credit cards, similar to PayPal, allow more recourse by the buyer. Both parties get a chance to have their side of the thing heard in order to settle a dispute. So credit card and PayPal both have like arbitration systems, so does Venmo, and so does a bunch of whatever the other ones are. Okay, so Incoterms we talked about just a little bit. Trade terms are key elements of international contracts of sale, and they tell the parties what to do with respect to carriage of goods from buyer to seller, export and import clearance, and so on. And they also explain division of costs and risk between the parties. For example, most common Incoterm that's used is Ex Works, and that could be either Incoterms 2000 or 2010, and I believe that there's also possibly a 2020 version of Incoterms. I haven't seen them out there yet, but they might be out there. And they represent the seller's minimum obligation, since the seller typically only has to place the goods at the disposal of the buyer. In other words, Ex Works means, come shop me, Mr. Buyer, here I am. So if you pay, I'll let you have it. And then it's up to the buyer to get it out of my country and into their country. In actual functioning fact, what it works like is very much like FOB. In other words, I, as the seller, will put that on a common carrier for the buyer, and then it's up to the buyer to move it to their country, to clear it through import control and so on at their end, customs, pay taxes and duties and that sort of thing. Import control is a generic term for an agency that allows an import to enter a country and collects duties and taxes as required by that nation. In the USA, call it Customs and Border Patrol. In other countries, they call it whatever they call it. Required documents to go with the shipment generally include a conforming invoice, usually in triplicate, and a certificate of origin of the goods, although this varies from country to country. Common carriers like UPS, FedEx, and DHL often have their own import-export brokerages in each country, and they are a tremendous help in getting this done correctly. So if you're a small package shipper, you can quite literally have UPS, FedEx, or DHL create the paperwork on their forms. In other words, you put the information for the export on their forms, including the international tariff codes and things like that, the classes of the goods and so on, which you can look up online. And you create all these documents online, and then those documents, they will allow you to print off their website, but then they will also use that documents to do the import for your customer. They'll let you file what used to be called a shipper's export declaration. It's now called an electronic export information record, an EEI. Anytime a shipment leaves the United States for more than $2,500, you have to file an EEI. The easiest way to do that is to do it electronically, directly through the, believe it or not, Census Bureau, which keeps track of exports for some reason. And obviously, if you get caught not doing that, you can't export anymore, so it's important that you do that. So you can pay a little extra as a shipper and have UPS, FedEx, or DHL file that electronic export information record for you, and the fee is very reasonable. So the pro forma invoice is a before-the-fact invoice that allows you to get the prepayment, but it does not rule on the shipment. What rules on the shipment is a document that has the word invoice on it, that with no pro forma in front of it, okay? A freight forwarder is a company that consolidates smaller shipments into larger shipments, and it bundles and handles import-export documents for buyers and sellers. When goods are purchased by a buyer physically in one country, needs to move goods to another country for use in his own or a vendor company's facility, so on and so forth. So freight forwarders are very useful when you have some kind of oddball shipment. It's physically large, maybe it's pallet size or that sort of thing. You will allow them to consolidate that into a belly container that goes on an airliner or something of that nature. Customs broker shepherds shipments through the import process and usually has a bonded warehouse in each port of entry in which they operate, where the goods can physically wait for clearance by import control. And so when you quote lead times internationally, you go on a website and you'll get a quote on international shipping from somebody that you're going to add to your invoice, quote that to the customer, then the customer needs to understand that that is the date of arrival in the bonded customs warehouse. Now, typically clearances can occur while the shipment is in process, such that when it hits the bonded custom warehouse, it's already cleared out of the customs warehouse. But things have to sometimes sit in that bonded customs warehouse waiting for a clearance and import control, and that is out of control of the seller, so that is not included in your quote for the amount of time it takes to ship something. So that is the supplement information for Session 2, and you now know more than you ever wished to know about business language and that sort of thing. So we'll be back with Session 3 in the next video. Thanks for listening.